Microphones are live.
All right, this meeting is called to order. Can we begin with a roll call, please?
Councilmember Lemus,
Here.
Councilmember Harvey,
Here.
Vice Mayor Ford,
Here.
Mayor Sparks.
Here.
Show Councilmember Rivers as absent.
All right, thank you. I would invite everyone to stand with us for the land acknowledgement and the Pledge of Allegiance. The city of Cotati recognizes that we are on the ancestral lands of the coastal Miwok, who are the original caretakers of this area. We respectfully acknowledge the indigenous peoples who have been stewarding and maintaining a relationship on this land as knowledge keepers for millennia. This acknowledgement does not take the place of authentic relationships with indigenous communities, but serves as a gesture of respect to the land that we are on. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now I will read off a meeting orientation for new attendees and viewers. In conformance with the Brown Act and the adopted City Council rules, the meeting agenda includes items labeled as action items, where the City Council may consider the item. If the City Council considers an item, citizens will be afforded the opportunity to provide comments relevant to the item being discussed. The meeting agenda also includes a citizens' business item, which is the designated place on the agenda where citizens have the right to say whatever they wish. However, the Brown Act prohibits the City Council from taking action or considering any item that is not on this agenda to ensure that other members of the community who wish to provide comment are notified in advance through a properly noticed meeting agenda. Measure S supports police services, a variety of recreation programs for all ages, and the maintenance of our streets, parks, and public buildings. See details on the web at www.cotadicity.org. Citizens interested in receiving City of Cotati community alerts via text or email are encouraged to sign up via Civic Ready by signing up on the city website, www.cotadicity.org, under the How Do I link at the top of the homepage. Like always, we love to hear from you, so please feel free to contact the city at 707-792-4600 or info@cotadicity.org. If you have a non-emergency issue after normal business hours, you can contact us at 707-792-4611. And of course, if you have an emergency, please contact 911. Continue to look for updates on the city's website and social media channels available on Facebook, Instagram, and Civic Ready. We're going to move on to the approval of the final agenda. Are there any proposed changes to the agenda?
No proposed changes, but just one note on item 5. We should just read that out just for the ordinances that are going to be approved.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
And resolutions. Thanks.
Number 5, approval of minutes and notice of waiving of reading of all resolutions and ordinances introduced and or adopted under this agenda. There were no minutes. Sorry. Okay. Now we're going to move on to citizens' business and public comment for consent calendar items. Any member of the public wishing to speak to the council on any items listed on the consent calendar or any matters not listed on the agenda that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council may do so at this time. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the council is not allowed to consider issues or take action on any item not listed on the agenda during this period. Pursuant to City Council Policy 2021-01, comments of any member of the public are normally restricted to a total of 3 minutes in length per person for matters not on the agenda, and a total of 3 minutes per person in length for any and all items on the consent calendar. The mayor may extend the time limit for a reasonable time where a disability accommodation has been requested. To facilitate public comment, the clerk will alert speakers when there are 30 seconds remaining. All right, is there anyone in the room who would like to speak during citizens' business or speak on a consent calendar item? Coming up. Okay, there will be a time for public comment on that one, for sure. Can we open it up to Zoom, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sparks. Speaking to our Zoom attendees, if you would like to make a public comment for citizens' business or consent calendar items, please use the raise hand icon. Mayor Sparks, that'll end public comment.
All right, thank you. Is there any council member who'd like to pull a consent item? All right, be looking for a motion.
Move to approve the consent calendar?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the consent calendar is approved unanimously. Item 10 will be direction on future agenda items. We'll open it up to the council. All right, moving right along. That'll take us to item 11, public hearings. Who's going to take this one? Okay, so I believe our order of business is we start with a presentation and then we'll open the public hearing after that.
Well, thank you, Mayor Sparks. JP Harris, Senior Planner with the City of Cotati. I have a presentation and the applicant has a presentation as well. So it might be best if, as a suggestion, just we'll do our presentations and then be available for questions by the council.
Okay, great.
And then open it up.
All right, thank you.
So tonight we're talking about the Cotati Village project. You will recall there was quite a heated discussion about this project 7 months ago when we were talking about a zoning amendment in this area, and the room was much fuller that night. So, next slide, please. So this project is an apartment project. It includes 6 buildings, 177 units. They range from 1 bedroom to 3 bedroom. And 18 of the units will be inclusionary units dedicated to very low income people. Those are folks making 30 to 50% of the median income in Sonoma County. It also includes a 5,702 square foot community center located in Building E, which is that top center building in this kind of simplified site plan that's shown. A pool and outdoor open space area, Class 1 multi-use trail along the frontage of State Route 116, have landscaping, utilities, access from Alder, and then eventually it will take access at a realigned West Cotati Avenue, which is shown as Village Drive in this image here. So there are also some minor offsite improvements. That's the Village Drive connection to State Route 116, left and right turn lanes to be installed on Alder Lane, the southbound approach, an eastbound left turn lane on State Route 116 onto Alder, and utility connections and undergrounding of the overhead utilities that are currently on the frontage of the site. Next slide. This is the project site, is highlighted right in the center there. And a couple things to note about this slide. There's that red outline, kind of defines the area of what was called the South Sonoma Business Park. And historically, that entire area were kind of together as a development plan, and included the cottage housing, the cottages just to the north of the project site itself, what we're now referring to as the Redwood Row site, and the Lowe's development. The Lowe's development and the Redwood Row site were originally called the Marketplace, kind of division of this area. It was intended to be a commercial area. And I'm going to try to briefly go through a little bit of the history, because in a way these properties are tied together with various easements and access rights across them. Next slide, please. This is an aerial view of the site. The trees that you see in the center of the property, those are going to remain. The ones down towards the corner of Alder and State Route 116, down in the lower left-hand corner, Those are the ones that are going to be removed. Those are oak trees. And then right above the closed captions, there's a clump of acacia trees, which are non-native trees. Those are also being removed. Really, the reason that this project is before the council is because of the removal of those oak trees. The way our code is written, only the city council can authorize removal of native oak trees in association with a development project. So that's what elevates this project to the city council. Next slide, please. The zoning and the land use designation we've talked about in June and July, but it is a general commercial zoning district and a commercial Gravenstein corridor, general commercial land use area and a Gravenstein corridor, commercial Gravenstein corridor zoning district, which allows for commercial development, retail, restaurant, office, as well as mixed-use development at 12 to 15 units per acre. Next slide, please. So the required entitlements are preliminary design review, and I do want to mention that this includes a non-discretionary element, which is the density bonus. This is a right that's granted to developers when they provide a certain amount of affordable housing. It gives them basically favorable development incentives, including an increase in density, kind of prescribed parking limits, as well as concessions and waivers from certain development standards. The other entitlement is the tree removal permit. As I said, it's like 2 to 4 oaks. All of those will be mitigated per our standards. Future will be final design review. That'll probably be done at the staff level. And then the inclusionary housing agreement will come back to the city council for approval. And then there'll be improvement plans that will be necessary, and then the construction permits. Next slide, please. So this is going back in time. So I guess the story is that Cotati for decades has planned for intensive development of this site. Back pre-2000, it was targeted to be factory stores, but then really the development that came forward was the South Sonoma Business Park, which was going to be a corporate campus for Nokia. This is back in the day of the telecom boom that was happening up here. And so this was kind of the original idea, to just be a big office complex. And then next slide. As that went under development, this was kind of the alternative that popped out. And it includes up in that, on the top left-hand side, the cottages development. Cottages development was added to mitigate for the impact of producing so much commercial development and office space, that it would have an impact on housing. And so the cottages were added at that time. Of course, right around this time in 2002, the whole telecom industry collapsed. And next slide. And the plans for this site changed. And it became, the marketplace was like a commercial area with the Lowe's and some other larger square footage retail areas. And the village, and then all the office space got condensed into like those 3 buildings labeled A, B, and C at the bottom of the village. And then there were 46 units proposed as part of the village. That is the project that essentially was approved back in 2002 and then kept alive. Well, actually, I think it was approved in 2007, excuse me, the village part. And then had a series of extensions, both legislatively and by this council, to keep that map alive. Finally, in 2021, we learned that that project was not going to be developed, and a new project was going to come in. Next slide. And that is, well, go next slide again, please. And that's the project that we see here today, which again is 177 rental units. Next slide. Back in July, so kind of continuing with the background, back in July, City Council directed us to meet with the neighbors of, especially in the cottages, to talk about their concerns. And I highlight what their concerns were, and these are in a memo that's on page 283 of your packet. But essentially it was that the residents of the cottages really preferred the old village project. They were very concerned about traffic and parking on Ford Lane. These originally were going to be kind of connected, these two projects. They wanted to see separation between the projects. They were also concerned about the building mass and scale and proximity to their homes. And the density obviously was a concern to them. 43 units versus 177 units is a different type of project. I do want to say that today we could not, under state law, state housing law, we could not approve that village project today. The minimum number of units that we could apply on this size of a property would be 94 units. That would be the absolute minimum that we could accept. And that's what would have to be developed in a mixed-use development. It could be straight commercial, but if it's going to be mixed use, they would have to do 94 units. And then there was concern about commercial zoning. Then the issue of ownership versus rentals, and then traffic and parking on Alder Avenue. Those were the primary concerns that we heard. After those meetings, we met with the applicant, went through these issues, and let's go to the next slide. And in response, they did make some changes that were fairly significant, and they're highlighted here. First of all, there used to be two access points, vehicular access points, going from this project site onto Ford Lane, and they were going to share parking along Ford Lane. That has been completely eliminated. There will be no vehicular access onto Ford Lane. Ford Lane will essentially become part of the cottages for their exclusive use. The parking that was proposed there is going to be modified to just be 22 exclusive parking spaces for the cottages without having shared parking with the village project. And then Unit E, the center building, was brought down to the south and then also rotated, which relieves some of the impact on the neighbors to the north. Those are the primary changes that were made. Next slide, please. Which gets us to this layout again, once again. Okay, next slide. And these are just some floor plans. What's to see here, I think, is there's like a clubhouse, a community center in that center building with the pool. Otherwise, it's just kind of a standard apartment layout, 3 stories. Next slide. These are the buildings that are fronting Highway 116. I think what to point out is the commercial development that anchors Building A on the west and then Building C on the east. Next slide. And we'll just go through these because I know they're in the applicant's presentation, but just quickly, these are just some renderings. They're also in your packet. Next slide, please. Next slide. Kind of planning considerations, where the design review, looking at the architecture, comparing them to our objective design standards, site layout, landscaping, and the ability for the city to provide services. Tree removal, like I said, 2 to 4 oak trees, retaining the central larger oaks. There'll be a replacement requirement, which is about 10 to 20 oaks, depending on what the final utility and pavement plan is like. And then but they're proposing already 171 trees, so significantly more trees after the project than today. The density bonus, just briefly, so that you understand what it is. So under our density standards, we have 15% maximum, 15 units per acre maximum density, which gets us 118 units. The way state density bonus law works, it's a sliding scale, but depending on the affordability level and the percentage that you apply, you get a certain percentage more density above the maximum. So they chose to dedicate 15% to very low-income folks, which gets them a 50% increase above the maximum density, which gets them to 177 units, which is the proposal today. And again, I wanted to just describe that the minimum that we could entertain on this property would be 94 units. Also, density bonus prescribes a certain parking ratios that you must use, and it's based on bedroom count. Per state law, they would be required to provide 223 parking spaces. Our code typically requires 2 spaces per unit, which gets you 354. They are proposing 331, so they're in the middle, definitely not as low as what, the maximum that we can require, but also pretty close to what we would require. And then concessions and waivers. Concession is anything that would help to reduce the cost of providing the affordable housing. And state law actually specifically calls out percentages of floor area. So in this case, the one concession that they're asking for is a reduction in commercial floor area. In this zoning district, we would typically require 25% of the floor area to be commercial. For them to meet that, they would either have to build a lot more building, or they would have to lose the number of units that they're providing. And so that's a concession that is clearly a concession, and it must be granted to them. A waiver would be if we had a standard, like a height standard, that wouldn't allow them to build the number of units. So let's just say they wanted 177, they're gonna build it, they could put it in a tower, but our heart limit said no. If that was the only way that they could get to those number of units, then that standard would be waived, as well as any other standard that would prevent them from providing that housing. Okay, next slide. And then the easements I already talked about. There'll be 22 exclusive spaces for Katati Cottages. That's a new easement. There'll be public access on that Village Drive, which will become the primary entrance, and then Bachelor Lane, so that anybody will be able to use those roads. There'll be utility easements, which is normal. The inclusionary housing, 18 affordable units. Those will be very low income. They'll be spread throughout the development and include 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And there'll be an affordable housing agreement, which will be coming back to the City Council for approval. And traffic, Class 1 along State Route 116. And I mentioned the turn lanes onto Alder and the turn lanes coming out of Alder. Construction of Village Drive, and then the West Katati realignment, which will be a key thing in the future, because that will be how we get pedestrians across the street onto West Katati Avenue, and it will also fix a known issue with the way that West Katati Avenue now meets with Highway 116. Next slide, please. And this is kind of it's a graphic of what we're proposing. It's been modified then. The colors that you see are actually describing areas of wetland that would need to be mitigated, as well as the green are the bike lanes. Next slide, please. This is showing the left turn lane on Highway 116 onto Alder Avenue. Next slide. And then CEQA, it's a little bit different than what you're probably used to. This is more and more being used as Section 15183 out of the CEQA guidelines, which essentially says if you have a project that meets your zoning and the general plan, you apply the mitigation measures, you compare it to your general plan EIR, and you if there's nothing unique about this site, you apply the mitigation measures that come from that EIR to the project, and those, which is what we've done here. And on that note, if you do have questions about CEQA, our CEQA consultant is here and can address any of those kind of questions. But essentially, the environmental conditions of approval are conditions of approvals number 1 104 through 127. So it does get an environmental review. It's quite robust, I think, if you looked at it in your packet. And it just makes it exempt from further environmental review, like an EIR. Next slide, please. So that's my presentation. Our recommendation from staff and the Planning Commission is that the City Council conduct this public hearing and then adopt a resolution approving preliminary design review and a tree removal permit to allow the mixed-use development of 177 units on a 7.83 acre site at the northeast corner of Alder Avenue and State Route 116, and also find that the project is consistent with the general plan EIR and exempt from further environmental review per CEQA 15183. And that's my presentation. And if you want to ask me questions now, you could do that, or we could go to the applicant's presentation.
All right, thank you. Could I ask for some guidance from the city attorney? I just want to make sure that we conduct the steps correctly. Is this the time to open the public hearing, or should I wait until after questions?
I think it would be appropriate to wait until after questions.
Okay.
And then open up the public hearing and hear from the applicant and any members of the public at that point.
Okay, so let's do questions for Planner Harris first. Any questions?
Just one about the long-term sort of public access. In the event that Alder access to 116 were ever closed off, it's Bachelor Lane, then the public access would be the route in, say, to the cottages? You'd come in on Village Ave and go across Bachelor and then up Alder?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it would. That would be the primary. If Alder was closed,
Right.
they would have, well, there'd be two alternatives for them. Alder is only envisioned to be closed under one scenario, and that's if there's a new north-south street that connects from Hellman down to 116. So we're not going to just close Alder without having that connection. So they could, and we don't know how that connection might connect also over to Alder.
I see.
So they're very well
And that's
could
to the
be-
west of Alder.
Yeah, that's right. It will
Okay.
be to the west of Alder. That's
Okay.
where it's proposed today per the general plan.
Okay.
So the answer is they would probably could do one of the other.
Got it.
you know.
Thanks.
Yeah, my question is, when I was looking at the stormwater control plan, I saw that some of the bioretentions are farther away from the development. There was one there, and then there was two others that are further away. How does that work?
It gets conveyed through a pipe up to, I think you're talking about that detention area that's actually north of the cottages. That must be the area. So it will be conveyed through a pipe up to that particular detention basin.
Okay.
And then it will be discharged into that basin.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious because I saw there was only one in the development and two others were
Yeah.
further away. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, you have to be patient. So it talks about, on 116, a landscaping strip would be provided for tree planting along the southern property line, but it just says the strip's going to be there. It doesn't say that it'll be planted. So my question is will it be planted or is just going to be left there?
Can you, well, yes, it will be landscaped. I want to make sure I understand what
It
strip you're
says-
talking about. Can you?
Yeah,
cite the
page 24,
Okay,
under landscaping and lighting, the very last sentence in the first paragraph, a landscaping strip would provide for tree planting along the southern property line fronting 116. It doesn't sound like it's going to be planted, it just said it's going to be, would provide for it to be there. I just wanted to be sure that 116 was going to have trees
it
planted.
is going to, and actually, I think, I'm going to try to find the landscape sheet, which shows that. If you look on your larger plan set,
I just want to be sure that it's going to be planted and not just left there and,
no,
For somebody else
is
to-
intended to be planted, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the
And
question.
sheet L1 shows the trees that are there, and it also shows kind of the area that will also have vegetation kind of between the building and that pathway that's going to go in.
Okay. On the same page, on the wastewater, it talks about two sanitary sewer laterals, yet back in the conditions, it only says that there's one. So I'm a little confused. Is there one on Ford Lane and one out to 116? Or is there only one out to 116? Because they say different things.
Do you recall, Craig? Yeah.
This was unresolved in this process, but we'll have a chance to get resolved in the improvement plan approval process. There's a potential to serve the site off of our sewer main in 116. And there's also a sewer main that runs behind the site through an easement to Hellman. Under the city's standard requirements, we would want just one sewer lateral and one water service connection to the property, since it's just one property under one owner. So during the review process for the improvement plans, we'll get them down to the one.
So we will only be doing one, because my concern was it talked about adding a new lateral onto Ford Lane, and I was concerned, well, what would we then be doing to Ford Lane, and would we be then fixing Ford Lane? But you're saying that that's not likely to happen?
Yeah, the sewer study has all of this wastewater coming out to the south on Highway 116. It has the capacity to do that.
Okay, they weren't consistent, and that kind of threw me. Then on the solid waste, in the report, it says 4 covered solid waste containment areas are provided, but when I looked at all the drawings, it appeared like there were 5. And it was inconsistent, and I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I apologize for that. That little piece was written, and then they made some adjustments when they moved the building to accommodate them, and that's when that third one got added in. It was kind of a late submittal, and I didn't catch that in that particular write-up.
Okay, I just was curious. And given the placement of them, there's like 3 in the back and then 2 kind of in the middle. Will that be sufficient for the commercial that's kind of all the way up in the front? Will that be satisfactory?
I'm assuming it would. I haven't done a calculation on that. The commercial spaces only amount to 5,000 square feet. They're not large commercial spaces.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And speaking of the commercial space, who will manage that space? How will that get managed?
I don't have an answer to that. Perhaps the developer can provide that.
Okay. On the existing easements, there's a whole section that talks about the 22 versus 36, that you spoke about. But it also says that if the Cotati Cottages owners reject this recommended modification, then the current restricted parking easement will continue. Do we know if they have accepted it or not, or is there a time frame?
My understanding, and they can speak to this when they get up, is yes, they did come to formal agreements, actually as late as last night, that they are going to accept those 22 spaces, and as well as some other conditions.
Okay. Next is, I was really confused by the whole 3 traffic tables that were in there, because these tables imply that the parking or the traffic flow is going to get better with 177 units. And that just doesn't, I'm having a hard time understanding that, how that could possibly be with some 300 plus added cars, that it would be better.
Well, I certainly understand what you're saying. And unfortunately, you don't have the whole traffic, and, well, it was an appendix, which is online, but you don't have the whole thing to read. The reason it is because of the striping that's gonna be done on Alder Lane. By providing both a right turn and a left turn. And I know it's not intuitive till you start thinking about, those hours are provided during peak hours. And what happens at Alder right now is if you're gonna come up to Alder and you go right, you can pretty much make a right within just a couple seconds. You can make a right turn really easily. Often the delay comes from making a left turn. And so you can have one left turning car and 3 right-turning cars behind it, but all the right-turning cars are delayed by the one left-turning car. And what that does is it causes the average wait time for every car to go up. Whereas if you can just move those right-turning cars real quickly, then the average wait time goes down dramatically. So it's a matter of averages is what's happening there. So it's the striping plan. So if there was no development and the striping plan went in anyway, you'd see a major drop in delay, as opposed to just that little tiny little bit of a 0.2 of a second drop that I think you're seeing in those tables.
And do we have any sense of,
Also, we did have that traffic report peer reviewed because neither of us are traffic experts, and so we do want to have other professional eyes looking at that, and it passed their test as well. I'm sorry.
do we have any sense of, you talked about right turn versus left turn. When they look at that, do they say half of them are going to turn right and half of them are going to turn left?
They do. I don't know.
Do they
those-
just make a just arbitrary assumption?
No, there's a little bit of arbitrariness there because you're making forecasts into the future, but they're based on traffic counts and what they observe, and then they make guesses based on development that's planned in the area, in the surrounding area, what's been permitted in this area. And they make estimates about how many cars are going to go in different directions, yes.
Okay, because this almost looks like it assumes everybody's turning right, and my guess is that the majority is going to turn left, because there's not really a whole lot to the right unless you're going to Sebastopol.
The traffic report is available online, and that, I think you can see, it gets nauseating almost, but they have every turn movement for pages and pages, describing the numbers that are expected to make their turns.
In the tree plantings, I didn't see anywhere in here size of trees. I mean, obviously, when you put the pictures up there, they look like they're fully mature trees. I know in other projects, we've talked about, different gallon sizes, so we're not getting 1 gallon trees that are gonna take 20 years to.
They're in there on sheet L3.
L3, okay.
Yeah, that's probably the second to last sheet. If you have the 11 by 17, I know in the packet it's very hard
Okay.
to see.
This is probably hard to see, okay.
Yeah, but on the 11 by 17, yeah. General, the trees are 15 gallon minimums, but some of them are gonna be 24-inch box trees.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's good. I didn't see that part there, so that's good. In your presentation, you said that Bachelor and Village are going to be public streets in all of.
No, public access.
Public act, okay.
They'll be privately owned streets.
They'll be private. So in all of these documents, when it says private, it means that they own them, not that people can't access them?
That's right. They will own the streets, they will maintain the streets, but there'll be a public access easement over the streets, so the public, and the sidewalks adjacent to them. So the public will be able to access through that site and up to the park. That's going up actually on the property to the right.
And same with Village? Village Street?
Yeah.
Okay, because
It's
they
in
both
Village.
say private.
Yeah.
My concern is here, we're looking at putting a nice stoplight in, and if they can't, if everybody can't use it except the people in that development, that sort of defeats.
Right, and.
Kind of the
and
purpose.
It also would especially defeat commercial development. You have to have public access with commercial development.
This one, I know it's in the code, but it confused me a little bit. They said on the fencing on 116 that the fencing had to go down to 4.5 feet.
That's, that's a design requirement, but right now, and it's also the appearance from Highway 116, looking at that, you'd be looking at basically a wall, a fence wall, as opposed to like the landscaping and the building there. So it's 4 feet solid. They can have a taller fence. It's just got to be open above that 4.5 feet. So that can be wrought iron or something like that.
I guess I was concerned about the privacy of those units on that side with all of the windows. Then you're like looking in.
I think the same privacy issue applies to any window, even on the second or third story. They don't have the
Right.
screening. You
Right.
would use.
And I would just say, from the staff perspective, we look at these as fronting onto the street. So the idea is that's your front porch, and that's how it engages. And generally, you don't want to wall off your residential interaction with your streets. I do understand it's the highway, so.
Yeah, it's the highway. It's a little bit different. That's why that kind of threw me a little bit. But I saw that it was stated that that's the code that's there. It just seemed, you addressed that one for me. That one you're working on. In the conditions, it says that we need to talk about trucks on Alder. Are we gonna address that at a different stage, or, because it's weird that it's in the conditions,
Well,
that we're going to discuss it.
it's a strange condition. It's not that you're going to, it was that the planning commission recommended that you do it, because this came out of the conversations that we had with the folks at the cottages. One of their big concerns is, all the traffic that's going, especially truck traffic that's going up to Alder Lane and Blodgett Street there. And then it's using Alder as that cut through. I know that the city manager and the department heads have initiated discussions amongst themselves about it. There's nothing to prevent it, but there's a process that we have to go through. And the other thing is, we only control a portion of Alder Lane, for example.
Right, because some of it's county.
Some of it is county, so there's things to consider there. But, so the recommendation is really just that, you guys think about it,
Okay.
and if we can do it, that you do it,
Now, since
It's
part of that
it's
is
a strange thing,
county,
but they just wanted to relay
Yeah.
that concern.
yeah. Since part of it's county, can we even have an ordinance over a county road? It doesn't seem like,
So the form it would take would be a council discussion and potential adoption of an ordinance. And it would really just be from 116 to the city limit line.
to the city,
Yeah.
which,
Functionally, I'm not sure. We'd have to look into the
Right.
implications of that, but we couldn't obviously adopt a truck route ordinance over county road.
okay, that was my, I'm like, well, how's this gonna work? So the project has 5 buildings, 6 buildings. Are they going to be staged, or are they all gonna be built at once?
Everything indicates the whole project's going to be built at once.
It will be built at once. And when that is built at once, there's no conditions in here or occupancy standards or anything like that for the pool and playground? So what is to keep them from doing like what happened last time and they don't get built?
Well, our open space standards do require a certain number of amenities in that open space, and it includes the pool and the community center. So they're obligated to provide those amenities. There's nothing overtly in the conditions that say you shall build this pool prior to occupancy or something. We could add something like that if it were the council's
I would-
desire.
Given the history,
Yeah.
I would like to see that in the conditions so that we're not sitting here, well, I won't be here, but we're sitting here 10 years from now or 20 years from now when this actually happens and saying, oh, it didn't get built. And we have another crowd of people that want to do that. So, yeah, the pool and the playground. And then I think I know the answer to this, but I just wanted to be clear. So the deed restrictions on the affordable units, does that come in the affordable housing agreement? Is that where that comes?
That's right.
Okay.
Well,
Because there's nothing in here.
that's where the agreement will be, and I'm not sure
For like the-
what the instrument's gonna look like. But that's what you will make a decision on later.
For like the 55-year or whatever.
It has to be 55-year with the
55 year.
density bonus project, but also you'll be looking at the number, their location and the unit makeup, as well as the agreement and how they're going to be managed and, make sure they're going to the right people.
Okay, and one last question. Thank you, Laura. In the picture that you had up there with the existing trees, I'm trying to relate that to Bachelor Lane, and they don't kind of match up because at least one tree seems to be in the path of Bachelor Lane, and then if you look at the diagrams, it also looks like there's carports there. So I was having a hard time really putting the two pieces together to see how the trees would be okay. Because they don't show those trees in any of the pictures. They show ones they're gonna plant, but not,
I think maybe the best one is the neighborhood context map, which is this third page in the,
that white area there.
that white area in the center, you'll see there's like a kind of cloud shape around it.
Right,
That's the drip line of those trees.
okay, because that doesn't look, what threw me was that doesn't look like the picture the visual that you put up there with the bird's eye view. They don't look like they exactly kind of match up to the diagram.
There might be one or two that are being removed there, I just can't recall exactly
Okay.
where those. I don't think so. I think we're trying to save all of them there. That's
Okay.
why there are some parking spaces that are being removed. I don't even know why it's.
Because in the other pictures, it looks like the parking spaces are still there. In that one diagram, it doesn't look like there are parking spaces, but if you look at, some of the other ones, like A5, a little bit farther down, I think what you're seeing is you kind of have the outline of some of the trees, but there's carports there, or parking spaces, or I don't know what they are.
Yeah, I think it's a little clearer in the civil plans.
Okay,
You'll see that there are parking spaces that are being removed that are not there.
Okay.
So it protects those.
okay.
In addition, I still am concerned about preserving those trees, so we've asked them to work with an arborist.
I saw that, yeah. Yeah, I saw that. That was great. And I saw that it also says if they run into any problems, that the arborist needs to be contacted to come up with a solution. So that is good. So, thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you for the patience.
Thank you. I had did you have another question? Or?
One additional question. I noticed on the artist renderings that there was Trex fencing, quite a lot of Trex fencing that's going to be used. Does that have like anti-graffiti coating on it or something?
I'm sorry, you'd have to ask the applicant. I just
Okay.
don't know. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I had a few questions also. For first, kind of a big question. Can you, just for the council's benefit, can you clarify for us which portions of this are sort of prescribed by state housing law that we don't have discretion over, and what things we do have some discretion over? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, it is getting difficult for even us to discern where we have discretion and where we don't. Because it's becoming more and more clear that the only things we can actually kind of enforce, in fact, I was just talking to John prior to this meeting, seems to be the objective standards that we have. And so you know, I don't know. One thing we can't adjust is we can't talk about the units because that's a grant from the density bonus. So you can't ask, you can ask, but the applicant does not have to reduce the number and you can't deny them on that basis. I think you can ask and make suggestions of any type. You know, I don't know, how do you want to?
The entitlement before the council is design review and tree removal.
Yeah,
So the question about use, the question about number of units, those are all prescribed and allowed. And even with design review, because the state has said we can only apply objective standards, and then that the applicant has concessions and waivers that they can automatically have rights to use to reduce some of those design criteria in order to facilitate their project, our hands are somewhat tied. But it is still a discretionary project under state law with those very narrow sideboards.
Okay, thank you. Another question I had was about the parking, the easement and the number to 22 parking spots. It looked on the map as though the 22 spots came from parallel, like striping as parallel parking. But I know currently the residents use that as head-in parking. So why is it, can you just explain why it transformed into parallel parking?
because currently they're parking on the property to the south.
Okay, so it's
yeah.
moving the line
Yeah, well,
up from where,
yeah, I mean, right now, it's in first of all, it's on their property outside of the easement that they're in. So essentially, there's trespassing happening there. And the way that project is being designed, it will accommodate parallel parking, not the head-in parking. It previously did have the former design when it was going to be shared parking, and it didn't have that kind of parking strip. There was room, and they moved it got moved, and they were going to have that shared parking was going to be perpendicular, and they made the movement. Things changed, so that you can only fit parallel parking in there now. And within that boundary, I actually went out there with the fire department and talked about parallel parking, and there's just not enough room, perpendicular parking. There's just not enough room to accommodate that on Ford Lane without significantly, changing the property line there.
okay, thank you. Another question is I know you don't have a crystal ball, but the realignment of West Cotati Avenue, what is the best case scenario of when that could occur, that improvement to that intersection?
Well, I think the big part of that answer I'm going to let Damien finish this, but a big part of that answer is going to be whether or not these development projects happen, because a lot of the money for that will come from their traffic impact fees. And so if, basically if Redwood Row, there's $1 million, this one will be $1 million in fees. Cotati Village 2 million in fees. We just approved a project, it will be another $250,000 in fees. So it's a matter of these projects coming forward, and then there's other monies available, perhaps even some federal earmarks, and that's where I'll turn it over to Damien, who can talk about other funding sources.
Yeah, thanks, JP. So in terms of the process, I think, so Caltrans is an unknown in terms of how fast they can process the design reviews that we send them. But I think in a optimistic scenario, we would be done with design at the end of next fiscal year. So fiscal 24-25, we'll be done with design and theoretically able to actually put it out to bid. That does, of course, depend on having the money to pay for the construction, which is something that we've been working on. Both, there's the potential, there's some potential money that we're getting, but it's not final yet. So we're trying to get some grant money. The impact fees would be part of the solution to fund the project. So there's a lot of different pieces that have to come together to fund the construction. But and I think in all of our experiences, once the design is ready and sort of ready to go, the projects become a lot more attractive for funding. So I'm optimistic that once the design is basically done, that we'll have at least most of the funding, then hopefully we can figure out any remaining funding gaps we have at that point.
Thank you. Looking at I think I got the answer to one of my questions, which was the bedroom count for the affordable units. That's just completely to be determined still? Or do we know a preliminary?
They may be a little farther down the path and what those are gonna be, and you
Okay.
could ask the developer.
Okay. And then going to the conditions, I had a question about one of the conditions the planning commission added, which was to incorporate north-south pedestrian access along the property line to the flag-shaped park, including removing carports between Bachelor Drive and the park. And I think we received some public comment on that as well. Just what is the plan for making sure that pedestrians are able to walk through these neighborhoods and not have to walk along 116 and not have to compete with cars all the time and have some nice walking paths?
So there's two parts to that, maybe even three. There's the multi-use path along Highway 116, so they won't be in the roadway, they'll be up near the development. That's going to be a public access easement. And that eventually will connect to the property to the west and continue through the Redwood Row site. So that will be a continuous bike path that will connect kind of where the sidewalk is, right at the Chinese restaurant. Pardon? Bike and pedestrian. Also, like I mentioned earlier, there'll be access up Village and down Bachelor over to Alder. And then what that is these folks have access to that I call it a flag-shaped park, that little flag-shaped park. So what's not clear in the site plan is how, what's that pedestrian pathway going to be? That's what that condition gets at, is delineate where that pathway is going to be. The thing about the carports is really coming from staff, and that is anticipating another park that's going to be built as part of the Redwood Row project. We call it the Pizza Pie Park because it looks like a pizza pie, but we don't want the carports right against a park. We want that to be open and landscaped, and so that's where that little piece came from. But it was primarily making sure that the public could access, at least the people that have rights to that park up there can have it. The other park is going to be a public park.
Okay, and a follow-up question about the public use path. What is the mechanism to make sure that gets built as part of the project? Sort of similar to
I'm sorry, I missed the very
the
first
public this one, the public use path.
the public, yeah.
Yeah, what's the mechanism to ensure that gets built by the time the buildings are occupied?
Well, we won't be able to final their improvement plans, which
Okay.
are bonded, without the completion of that park.
Okay,
So it's a financial bond.
with the path, you mean?
It will be part of their improvement plan.
Okay.
They will have to, we won't release that bond until they've completed their obligations under the improvement plan.
Okay, great, thank you. And then the last question I had was about I've lost there it is, condition 132. Applicant shall consider installing wiring and infrastructure to support electric vehicle charging at proposed parking spaces. Does our newly adopted building codes with multifamily EV parking requirements not apply to this project, or?
Yeah, so this project was actually, it's a SB 330 project, which vests the rights and the requirements that apply to the project at the time of application. So this SB 330 application came in prior to the council adopting that ordinance. However, staff anticipates the state having adopted those EV charging standards by the time they get into building permits. I'm not sure if that's the case, and Mr. Monahan has more of an idea about when he expects to be submitting for building permits. So the bottom line is this project will be subject to the building code that's in place at the time of submittal. And if that code is less restrictive than the council's mid-cycle code adoption, then that code will apply, the building code that's in place at the time.
The state building code?
Correct.
Okay,
because SB 330 does not exempt you from state code changes, only local.
Okay, thank you. That covered all my questions. Thank you for those answers. So at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Oh, sorry.
The developer also has a small presentation.
Is that considered part of the public hearing?
I consider it part of the public hearing.
Okay. So I'm going to open the public hearing and then invite the developer to make his presentation as part of that. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Madam Mayor and members of the council, thank you for your time this evening. Thank you, staff, for all your work, and JP for all the great explanation that he put into the project. I'm Tom Monahan. I think we've probably met before, and representing the project this evening. So I just wanted to kind of flip through a couple of slides, but as was mentioned earlier, the project application was submitted in December of 2021. So we've been working on this with staff for over 2.5 years. And along the way, we've had several revisions to the project, which you've heard about primarily in response to the Cotati Cottage neighborhood. And so first design that we had was changed. I just wanted to walk you through that so you really understand those changes that have undergone in the project. So maybe we can look at the next slide, please. And I think as JP pointed out, this was the original design, and this is Ford Lane right here. And originally, as you pointed out, there were 2 connecting points here for traffic. And in the old design, those projects were kind of interlinked with traffic and pedestrian. And the Cottage folks actually really wanted separation between the 2 projects as they've evolved. And I know we were here last summer, we went through a series of meetings, and we changed the design substantially. And I'll go to the next slide just to explain that a little better. And so what we really did on this slide, you can see Ford Lane is here. There's a row of trees that separate that, and ultimately there'll be a fence that we'll put up across there. So the 2 linkages that were here are now gone. So the village project really just circulates within itself. And we moved this building very far away from where it was close by to the cottages. And so we analyzed that. This was a single loaded building. It was very inefficient. So we went to one more step. If I can go to the next slide. And in this is the kind of current plan right here. And so what we did was we moved that building vertically. So these 3 buildings are now vertical, and which gives a lot of a smaller frontage that the Cottage folks are seeing to the project. So they're just seeing the short ends of the buildings, and the buildings have been moved substantially away from that Ford Lane area. So those changes have been integrated into the project now. And our land use attorney has been working with the Cottage's attorney to work out the easements, the 22 spaces. So we'll be creating those 22 spaces up on the north side of this area, in the area of the existing easement. And those 22 spaces will be really for the Cottage's exclusive use. So that's overflow parking for the Cottage folks. So I think we're in agreement with the Cottage folks getting that resolved. And you know, it was a lot of work and a lot of time to get that change made, but I think it was a significant response to what the neighbors had asked for. The other point, I think there are a couple of questions that were asked that I can perhaps answer. I think one question that was asked about the commercial space, who would manage that, and that would be managed by the professional managers that manage the whole center. So they'll just be treated like another tenant. We envision a convenience store or a coffee shop or something, those types of uses there that would be neighborhood serving. So those will be managed. There are a couple of other questions I think that I think you might have gotten answers to. If not, perhaps just remind me. There's one issue that I think was raised about condition number 128 that was talking about the pedestrian access to the park. And on this map, you can kind of see it. It's right along this area here. And in the Planning Commission, there was some discussion of, right now, what we envisioned here was a row of trees to really create a green buffer. We don't know what the final design is going to be for over here when the Redwood Row project goes. And ultimately that will, you know, be a larger park. We have pedestrian access in the north-south direction going up to here, and then also in the east-west direction connecting this way. We're not sure where the best place is. We're happy to put in a sidewalk here if that's desired. We think that's okay. And so some of the conditions that Planning Commission added many of them were suggestions, and we're taking those into consideration. This one also talked about removing these carports here, and we were very careful to move the carports away from this fence line here, which gives the cottages more privacy and a green kind of buffer area. So that's why we put these carports here. We need those covered parking spaces, and so the only other place to put them would be to put them back on the south side of this fence, which we think would be, kind of unwinding some of the benefits that we've created for the cottage folks. So we think leaving those carports there is okay. We're okay putting a pedestrian linkage in here by way of a sidewalk. So I hope that answers the question. So that condition, the removal of the, I think as JP mentioned, the removal of the carports came after the Planning Commission meeting. I didn't really think about it until we just recognized, that ask. We think it's better to leave them where they are now on that east side of the project. So I'm here to answer any questions. I can come back later if you want to answer questions. Otherwise, I think I'll just introduce Riley Hurd, our land use attorney, to just give a quick overview on some of the code questions that have come up. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Riley Hurd. I'm a land use attorney, and I specialize in state housing laws. The aforementioned confusing mess from the state. So as you've heard, and you may have experienced through your housing element process, we are in a new world order here when it comes to planning. And we've got the regional housing needs allocation, housing elements, all from Sacramento. I'm not sure how many, multifamily projects the council has processed under these new laws, but it changes daily. So I thought it might be helpful to just go over a couple of the highlights, and it also was responsive to some of the questions asked earlier. Next slide, please. So we haven't really talked about yet this evening the fact that this project is in your housing element and it's listed as a pipeline project. This is a kind of special classification for pending or approved but not built projects that the state allows you to count. So it keeps you from having to rezone other land or count other inventory by counting these pipeline projects. As you can see, and as you probably know, it's in there for 177 units. So next slide, please. I thought it was important to highlight what it means to be a pipeline project. HCD says that for a pipeline project, there's a number of things you need to do, but probably the most critical is demonstrate not just that it's going to be approved, but it's going to be built during the planning cycle. And that's unique to pipeline projects. Usually you're just zoning for it, proving you've got the capacity, and whatever happens after that. Also, you need to facilitate the development, expedite approvals, including any rezoning, which you guys already did at a previous meeting, and even provide a construction schedule to the state. So they're getting very granular on these things, particularly the pipeline projects. So listing it in this category is essentially a commitment to its approval and construction. And the reason this matters is, as you've probably heard, there's a history of unbuilt projects at this site and in this master plan. That used to be no big deal, except for the developer who had to carry all of the costs. But now, under this new world order, the city is required to file annual progress reports with HCD. Say, how much progress have I made towards meeting the RHNA? And the only way to retain some semblance of local control is to produce. You're not required to produce, but if you don't, then SB 35, all the new laws coming down from Sacramento, builder's remedy for the housing element, those things come into play when you get behind. So it used to be just zone and see what happens. Now it actually is important to produce, even though it's not a strict requirement. Next slide, please. So also courtesy of the government code is something we heard about in the Housing Accountability Act, and that says when you consider a multifamily project, you may only use objective standards to reduce the density or to deny the project. And what they have defined objective as is a huge, huge mouthful, and it's on the screen. But the point was essentially to take away the ability of local agencies to just say, we don't like it, or it doesn't fit. You got to point to something in the codes. And again, this is all very purposeful. Next slide, please. JP touched on this, but just a high-level overview of the waivers and concessions. Simplest way to think about it is a multifamily project gets an unlimited number of waivers from any development standard that physically precludes development of the project at the density to which it's entitled. So height limit's too low, that's gone. Setback too short, that's gone. I mean, this was probably the biggest deal to come out of the state density bonus law. This project actually does not avail itself of many waivers compared to some that I've seen where we're just doubling heights and things like that. Concessions, slightly different. They're based on achieving actual cost savings. And one of the most common ones is something that JP touched on and that's occurring here is when you have a commercial requirement. And right now the commercial demand is so low, almost zero, that this is one of the most common concessions I'm seeing issued because we can't lease the space. And we don't want any more vacant storefronts. So essentially, the state is saying, if you assign a density, you gotta let them get to it. Next slide. The final thing is the Housing Accountability Act actually set forth the only manner in which you can deny a project. It's extremely limited. It's a two-pronged test. I won't read it, but it basically has to be a public health and safety issue that there's no way you can address. So, to the chagrin of many, local control has been eroded. From what I can see, that's not stopping. The pendulum may swing back at some point, but this is where we stand. Staff has confirmed the project's conformance with objective standards, and so we believe that it's ready for approval. I actually wanted to respond to one question because I had the data, and this was about electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging. So the new building code requirement is set to take effect in July. Obviously, there's no chance that we're pulling construction drawings prior to that. So that requirement in July says that 50% of all spaces need to be pre-wired for EVs, and it says that 15% have to have the chargers installed at the time of construction. So here you're looking at 154 pre-wired spaces, and you would actually have 46 actual chargers. I'm an EV owner myself. I've been to superchargers up and down the 5. I don't think I've ever seen one with 46 chargers. That actually sounds really high, but that's the way we're going. So that's it for the legal stuff. Thank you for listening, and I'll just briefly invite up Isaiah Stackhouse. He's a project architect, and he can walk you through some of the design elements. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Riley. So my name's Isaiah Stackhouse of Trachtenberg Architects. Nice to be here with you all tonight. I'll just walk through the plans a bit here. So again, here's the site plan, again, Bachelor Lane, and the new Village Ave here. We're extending Bachelor Lane, connecting with sites to either side. Access out to 116 here with a retail and the new multi-use path along the front here. Again, we've created a large buffer, reoriented the buildings all east-west to create the maximum buffer to afford to the cottages here. And again, here are the central oaks, which are located on the civil plans and per the survey. We've really designed the project around these central oaks. We've got the main entry to the leasing office and the clubroom right across from the oaks here. Next slide. So here are typical unit plans. It's a mix of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units. These are all very carefully designed, very furnishable units that will have great light and air. It will include 18 below market rate units, and they will be of an even mix and equally distributed throughout the project. Next slide. Here are example elevations. We've held the buildings to 30 feet to the eaves, well below the height limit, which, as Riley mentioned, is very unusual in my experience as well. Normally with these density bonus projects, in order to hit the density bonus, we're 1 or 2 stories above the height limit. So it's a great outcome here that we can hit the density in only 3 stories and 30 feet. Next slide. So we're proposing a palette of rich materials, complementary colors of plaster and trim. Really what we're trying to do is create a high quality buildings that stand the test of time. With the design, we have there are balconies, bays, ins and outs to create shadow play. Again, the ground level units have patios. We've got retail out at the end caps here. That should be very active, and you can see the bike path across the front here. Next slide. Here is the landscape plan. Again, we're proposing, I believe it's 171 new trees, almost 1 for every unit, and extensive landscaping throughout, and again, a project that is really designed around maintaining the heritage oaks. Next slide. So here's a view from Alder and 116, looking northeast. New commercial activity in the foreground. We've designed these to integrate with outdoor spaces that could support outdoor seating for cafes and to grow a larger sense of community for the project. In the foreground here, you can see the new multi-use path that connects both to the east and the west. Next slide. And here's from Village Lane and 116 at the other retail. Next slide. Here's a view along Bachelor, looking at the leasing office and the clubroom. Next slide. A view of the pool. Looking back, here's the clubroom that integrates in with the pool. And next slide. And here is a view of the new outdoor playground and outdoor spaces. Next slide. So in conclusion, we have a project here that is consistent with the city's planning goals and objectives. It's exempt from CEQA. It's consistent with the city's goals, objectives, and policies to promote the creation of new housing, including improving economic vitality, creating more housing and more housing choices, improving housing affordability. It's consistent with the general plan, land use, and community design and zoning. It complies with all heights and setbacks. It exceeds the applicable parking and bike parking requirements. It exceeds the open space requirements, and we believe the project sets a high standard for other projects to come. Thank you, and the whole team is here for questions.
All right, thank you. I'd like to open it up to questions from the council. Yes.
So it was impressed upon us that this project is our responsibility, not the developer's responsibility. The state now is insisting that we complete these projects. And it sounded like the only mechanism, if you will, that we have to, I hate to use this word, but defend ourselves is this so-called construction schedule. My question is, when do we get that so that we have something that is defensible? Because as was also pointed out, we've seen tons of these projects come and go and they don't get built. So when do we get this so we at least have something that says, well, they said it was going to be built and here we are 10 years later and it's not?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the council will recall when we were going through the housing element process, we essentially had to demonstrate how we could meet and significantly exceed the RENA allocation that's been allocated to Cotati, which is about 240 units. And in doing so, and it was shown on Mr. Hurd's slide, we planned for 675 units and accounted for the Cotati Village project as a part of that. So we essentially overshot our RENA and demonstrated that we have not just the capacity to build the RENA or get the RENA built, but significantly more projects in our pipeline in case this project doesn't move forward or another project doesn't move forward, that we can hit that target over the 8-year cycle that we're in the first year of. To your question, Ms. Harvey, council member, we will be reporting on 2024 by April of 2025. So as we move towards the fall of this year, if we have not gotten a construction schedule yet or one isn't provided, that's when we would start to talk to the applicant about getting that in preparation for the APR to submit to the Department of Housing and Community Development in April of 2025 ahead of that deadline. And this will make much more sense next month when we present the 2023 APR to the City Council, because you'll see the context of all the information we have to provide, the format that we have to do it in, and also a summary of how we're meeting all of the housing programs that we've committed to for this next cycle.
So there's no place in the process, if you will, that the state edicts that you must have, you entitle a project and 30 days later you get this, or 60 days. So it could never come.
There may be. I am just, frankly, have not been able to keep up with the nuances of housing law. So there may be.
It will change tomorrow. So,
that's frankly right. So if the project is entitled, then we'll pivot over to worrying about the next steps, is essentially how I've been managing, trying to keep a handle on all of this.
Because it is a little bit disconcerting, as would put, that everything is our fault.
Madam Mayor, if I could just make a comment.
Yes,
I don't want to, I don't want it to go unsaid. I don't agree with everything that Mr. Hurd said. So I just want to make sure that the council's aware of that. There are consequences associated with not producing the units, but they're not catastrophic or dire. HCD has threatened to revoke housing element approvals before. I think that's their main remedy. I've not heard of them doing that. But there are consequences. For example, if you don't produce enough units, then you're subject to higher standards under SB 35. There's some other consequences I can't think of at the moment. I think Mr. Hurd was saying that in a way, but I don't want us to misunderstand exactly what he was saying. There are consequences. I don't think they're quite as dire as maybe he was suggesting.
All right, thank you for that. Were there other questions from the council for the developers? Yes, Vice Mayor Ford.
Well, I want to first ask JP, and then maybe the developers want to fill in. So what's happening with this flag-shaped park as part of this project? It's not landscape, nothing?
Yeah, no, there's nothing proposed with that park.
So, and that park is a private park?
It is private for the use of the cottages, this development village, currently it is. And I believe also the residents that would be part of Redwood Row would have access to that.
So as of the current approval, so that's not counted towards their requirement to provide public park land, right? They'll pay an in lieu fee instead?
They can either provide parkland by putting like a public access easement over that park, or they can do a park in lieu fee, yeah.
And they haven't indicated to you which
not yet.
direction we're gonna go with
No.
that? Okay. And the pie-shaped park that abuts it, you said that's intended to be a public park.
Then the discussions that we're having with the Redwood Grove folks, that's what their intention is yes, to make that a public park.
And how does the acreage of the flag-shaped piece compare with their dedication requirement if they want to satisfy that by, or dedicate or provide public access easement?
I think it's half acre there.
That's about half an acre?
Yeah, and I'll have to look at what their obligation, parkland obligation is based on our general plan requirement.
Okay.
It's not enough. It's not enough to meet it, but it could get them towards it.
Okay. Okay.
But right now, there's no plan to do anything with that park in terms of facilities or improvements or anything.
And I would add, that came out of our discussions with the cottages. So we specifically asked, do they want, would they appreciate improvements on that park area that they would have access to? We spent a lot of time trying to get information about ways to offset some of the concerns that they were voicing about certain amenities not being provided. The gist of what we got was they appreciate having it as it is.
Okay, thanks.
Any questions? I had a question for the developers. One of the ordinances that we've recently done at the council was the Wunnerf ordinance to try to get interior driveways within multifamily developments to be really pedestrian friendly, kind of shared spaces between automobiles and people and pedestrians. And I know that came into effect after your project was proposed, so it's not applicable. But I'm wondering if you have any openness to try to include more Wunnerf elements. Particularly, I'm looking at the spot between, oh gosh, I don't have the label of the building letters, so maybe you can help me out. Between D and E. Yeah, between buildings D and E, there's a little cut through with some parking on either side that seems like a natural place to include some pedestrian friendly sort of like different type of street that would indicate that pedestrians are welcome there. I'm wondering if you have any openness to including something like that in your design.
Could you find that slide? Maybe we can just put the plan up, the site plan? Oh, sorry. Just trying to figure out where exactly
Yeah,
you were referring.
I think we've got it now. So it's the north-south running, I think it was called a drive aisle between building D and E.
Oh, in there, okay. Yeah, we had redesigned the project so many times and had to comply with so many different fire department access and just a variety of things. So we really kind of were not able to accommodate a Wunnerf type of design. The Bachelor Lane is also, Bachelor Drive is also a kind of a more of a busy street, if you will. And so one of the suggestions that was made in the Planning Commission hearing was to try to put in some traffic calming there. And so we're looking into that now on that particular location. I think the suggestion that you're making there, we can look at that.
Okay.
I would really have to defer to our architects and see, because there's a balance of driving activities and various things there. But that if there was any opportunity to do it, might be in that location.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if you did some kind of course I don't know what traffic calming you're going to come up with, but if you did some kind of traffic calming on the natural crosswalks across Bachelor Drive between the buildings, like stamped paving stones that have a visually different appearance and no no curbs and things like that to make it clear that pedestrians are moving through. Perhaps you could continue some of those elements just through that drive aisle to make it more of a usable space for the residents. Something we're trying to achieve as a city is just to make our living spaces more pedestrian friendly, and that would go a long way towards it.
Yeah, thanks for that suggestion. On the other phase of the project across Alder, we are incorporating a Warniff into that project.
Okay.
Because that kind of came along a little bit later, and it lends itself to that. So we've we understand the spirit of that concept. We're trying to balance all those different points, but we can certainly look at that.
Okay, and then I had one more question, just because I heard something different from you and from staff, and I don't fully understand it. So I'd like to understand the carport removal issue a little bit better. Where was it that staff was wanting to see the carports removed from exactly?
So, looking at that image there, yes, exactly, right there, those.
That whole line of carports?
This was originally, for the couple of years we've been looking at this project, those were going to be permeable, kind of grassy paver area. And which we were fine with because it was going to be adjacent to that park, which we're looking at on the other side of the street, to the east. When this came in, then there was these last minute changes to accommodate the neighbors to the cottages. That became a row of carports. And I at first didn't see it because the hatching was similar to the permeable paving hatching. But then when we were looking at the access points on, how to move people up Village Drive to that flag-shaped park, that's when we're like, these are carports, and that would not look well next to a public park, just a kind of wall of carports, and we wanted to keep more openness and landscape in that area. That's the staff mindset behind it, which is the design we had been working with for a couple of years. So that was a last minute change to us, one that we thought interfered with the aesthetics of the park that we're planning next door.
And I would just add, right now, there is no dedicated pedestrian access from the village's site to the flag park, based on the current plans. That's also a critical element that staff feels needs to be addressed. So that combined with essentially walling, putting a visual barrier between the development and that future park are what we're trying to address with that condition.
And you had said that you're willing to put a sidewalk or a pedestrian path through that area. How would that work with the carports all existing there?
Well, there's a fairly good space there between where that row of trees is. There's enough room to put a sidewalk there. So we were in agreement to put a sidewalk there. We just, as I said earlier, we moved the carports away from the cottage area in order to give them kind of priority. And so that's our preference, is to keep it the way it is.
Is there a fence? I thought I knew this, but now, is there a fence between the carports on the north and Ford Lane where the parallel parking would be?
Yes, right now there are no carports on the kind of south side of.
I'm sorry, the parking, you're right.
Yeah, there's
the parking spots,
right, but it's shielded by a 7-foot tall fence.
So if there's a 7-foot tall fence there anyway, what would the downside of having carports there be?
They're just structural. They stick up higher than the.
Stick up higher than the fencing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's that?
The one other thing I would add is that we really have a whole strip of in-ground large trees as well.
Okay.
And so the carports would mean that we couldn't really have large trees there as a screening buffer. So that's why we'd really like to keep the carports where they are and to keep the large mature trees for screening.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question. Did anyone else have questions for the developer before we open public comment? All right, thank you so much. At this time, I'd like to open it for public comment. If anyone in the building would like to come speak We welcome you at this time.
Okay, lots of stuff to cover in 3 minutes. Howard Dalton, 7836 Rivard Court, in the cottages. As to where we are currently in the easement, unless something happened last night between 4:30 and this meeting today, that is in its being, we have a memorandum of understanding currently being negotiated between the Ownership's Council and the Cotati Cottages Council. And I would just make a note also that the cottages, the homeowners have to vote on this. And I think that's helping both sides. So it's come to something that's mutually agreeable. I want to, and JP, can you bring that slide back up that you just had? If you would. The other thing, I was at the Planning Commission, and this went through the Planning Commission. A couple of things came up. You'll notice, and by the way, the second rendering of the fence that we received is acceptable, and we're certainly, that fence we're willing to take care of. The trash enclosures are integrated into the fence. The north side of the trash enclosure is integrated into the fence, but the chairman of the Planning Commission is, as well as kind of one of the things that we were wondering, because the previous rendering had the center trash enclosure there, and then they had one on the west side and one on the east side for the ease of the tenants. And so the president or the chairman of your Planning Commission thought that might make some sense to spread it out for the ease of the tenants, and we wouldn't be stacking all three enclosures, even though we like the look of them in one place. Let's see. The Ford Lane, one of the things, and I need to know as this comes out in this timing and everything like that, the whole construction schedule and by phase, and I guess we're going to bring the project all up at once, but does that come out in one of the required documents? Because that's already come up with one from a number of homeowners going, well, once you get the building permit, et cetera, and get through the process, when does this thing start? And then the other thing is, and then the landscaping, I would encourage whoever the arborist is to make sure you guys touch base with Cagwin and Cogwin that have been managing this property and all of its plantings and everything for the last 6 to 10 years at the cottages now. We're turning over a lot of trees just because of the type of soil we're dealing with. We've had trees blow over with this wind and air. They can't get their roots in. So I would just recommend you guys touch bases with them. At least they got a good consultant. The other thing I wanted to say was Alder Avenue. Okay, and Alder Avenue is an absolute mess. And I'm just going to say to you, if with all the discussion, and we have a really good, I know I'm done, but I got to tell you, our part of the street is good. The part that's in the county is horrible. You guys have got to get into a conversation with them and get that addressed, because honestly, with the addition of this traffic, if you don't stop the commercial traffic, and with the addition of what's coming here, it is absolutely a disaster waiting to happen.
I'm so sorry to cut you off, but thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Yes, I see another person. Neil, come on.
Yes, good evening, Council. Thank you very much for some of the questions. Neil Hancock, resident of Cotati. I'm here representing walking in Cotati and being able to walk to this project, and very nice to hear some of those discussions on safety. I mean, it does seem like those discussions should be in the staff report. How can the circulation within the project also address safety issues, so that if you get vehicles, speeding delivery vehicles, which we're getting to see a lot more of, that they won't become a danger for people who actually live there. Very nice to hear the discussion on the condition 128, the walkway to the flag parking, the flag park. I mean, fundamentally, I brought up some of the issues with the fact that we have a lack of a bicycle and pedestrian plan update that goes back to 2013 when it was there. I brought it up in 2019. We're going through the process now. We have a little bit of the cart before the horse. Really, we needed to have that plan here. And I mean, I think that's a failure in local planning that we own as a town, that we haven't actually got it. So I just want to bring that up. There are some really interesting national issues coming up. There's a book called Paved Paradise, last year came out, How Parking Explains the World. I mean, it's just full of all the issues with parking. We know that from the point of view of climate change, it's something that really we've over-provided in parking, but it's differential. Some places have a lot of parking, other places don't. This book brings up one idea that's out there called spotparking.com, which is a commercial enterprise that's a way for landowners, property owners, to put up parking and that local residents can essentially book it. So it's a way of easily managing more common parking. We've got lots of parking out at Lowe's, but a different landowner. So, you know, is there some way that we can bring these two together? We've got another project that's coming up, and it's got parking on there. So, you know, getting the statistical nature of parking sorted out is a real challenge. Really appreciate the discussion that's been happening elsewhere as well of how to make walking access to the site.
30 seconds.
Really hope that you know, we can consider how people with wheelchairs, seniors or young people can cross 116. And I mean, so far it's not been very visible that this will actually happen because we, the city, have to get our thinking together and present it to Caltrans that we need a divided highway there. It won't slow the traffic down. I guess some of this will be coming up in the designs, but thank you very much. Good to hear some of the discussion.
Thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to make a public comment? Can we please open to Zoom?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sparks. Speaking to our Zoom attendees, if you would like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand icon. Seeing no hands, Mayor Sparks, that'll end public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. So, City Attorney, at this point, do we close the public hearing while we do our deliberations?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I will close the public hearing and open it up for council discussion. Anyone like to start us off? All right, Vice Mayor.
Well, the things that I'm thinking through are conditioning some occupancy permit on completion of the pool and the common amenities to ensure that those are completed concurrent. So not the first occupancy permit, but you know, maybe the fourth building or something like that would work for me. The carports, I'm supportive of staff's recommendation that they be moved from backing up against the park, but I want to point out that the carports as proposed don't have walls. There's roofs only on posts. But given that, there's an equal-sized buffer on the plans between the property line on the west, on the east and on the north, and they both have significant tree plantings along them. So I don't buy the moving the carports to the north would remove the possibility of the trees on the planting buffer. So I'm supportive of staff's recommendation to move those off of the park border. Other than that, I'm comfortable with the conditions that are in the proposal.
All right, thank you. Any comment over here?
I would like to add that we condition a walking path, you know, for some calming and also some walking path to that park, because it sounds like it's, you know, the developer said they'll build it, but I think we should put that in the conditions.
Any comments? No.
I have no additional conditions to add.
Okay. I have
Ben got mine.
question for staff then. Do we have the ability to condition any additional walking paths? Or are you proposing a new condition beyond what's already?
No, just what we discussed here.
Okay.
whether the carports are there or not, that there is some sort of walk path that goes toward the park from there to the 116.
Okay,
So you're talking along the eastern property line? Where, adjacent to
Yes.
that future park?
Yes,
yeah.
Eastern Village Avenue.
Yeah, you can condition that. That's acceptable.
and I'm sorry, I'm just checking because I was checking to see if that still was already, that was already a condition in the, added by the planning commission, correct? Okay. That, I think that's 128A. North-south pedestrian access.
Right, that is already in there, right.
Yes. Okay. Just to speak to your comment, I do agree with conditioning occupancy on completion of the pool and the public amenities that are in the plan. And, I'm sort of agnostic towards moving the carports. I don't know which one is more of a eyesore, to have them along the park or to have them along the neighborhood boundary with the villages. I would love to hear what your thoughts are, both of you, on conditioning the pool, the occupancy permit on completion of the pool and public amenities, and moving the carports. What do you think about those two? Yeah.
I definitely want a condition on there for the pool and the playground is what it's on the plans. On the carports, I don't care if the carports are moved or not. What I'm more concerned about is that there's a pathway. So if the carports can stay and it can be achieved with some access, it's sort of hard to tell from flat pictures without exact dimensions on there, but I think that there should be a way, a way to get down there. And as you pointed out, when you were talking about the inner way, people can't really walk because there's a cars on both sides, so they can't really walk down that little lane to get there either. So I would like a safe way on the easterly area.
Any other thoughts? Agree? Okay, yeah.
Just one more comment about the carport location. Along the north edge, there's a solid 7-foot wall already. So I'm not worried about the visual impact of roofs that are, 10 feet, 3 feet above that. That's very different than a 3-story building directly on the property line like the original plans that the cottages were objecting to. So I don't think that the carports along the north end trigger the same worry that a 3-story building right on the line do. And the fact that there's already that solid 7-foot wall means pretty minimal impact along that versus right up against a future public park. That's why I'm proposing we condition on moving those.
And you're thinking that the trees could still be planted there?
Well, so the applicant indicated some perhaps more mature trees along the northern strip. They do look slightly bigger in the landscape plan, and I know I could look at the tree list, and those are probably 2-foot square rather than 15-gallon trees. But the strip is the same width on both places, so I believe both places could support mature trees.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting taking that row of carports and putting them back on the northern end and swapping it for the open car spaces?
Well, that's what I would envision, but I would be happy to let them work out if they need that covered parking where it goes, just not up against the public park.
Okay, but you're not suggesting that they be eliminated and we lose that parking?
Oh, no.
I just want,
No,
okay,
no,
I just want.
definitely not lose the
Okay.
parking and
All
not
right.
even lose the covers, just
Okay.
not there.
Okay. Just wanted to be clear.
Okay, and so I'd like somehow in these conditions, there are conditions about the pedestrian access under 128A and conditions about the traffic calming along Bachelor Drive under 128B, and those are listed as planning commission items, but I think we heard some pretty strong opinions about those at the council level, so will that be kind of reworded.
Yeah, no, I can address that. There was a couple other that I have in my notes. I just wanted to run those by the
Yes,
council.
please do.
One, you had asked about the Class 1 pathway and the timing of that, and I mentioned there will be a bond with that, but we could, that's a similar condition, we could say prior to occupancy, that that Class 1 pathway be added, so it's more clear, if it provides a better comfort level to the council.
Is that, are you amenable to that? Okay, yes.
Well,
So-
okay, I was going to say, I'm happy with bonding as the mechanism to ensure the path.
Well, it will still be bonded.
Right, I know. I'm just saying, I don't feel like we need to add additional conditions for the path because we already have a bond to ensure that it's completed. That's all I'm saying.
Okay,
Okay.
so maybe we don't need it, sounds like.
Okay. And then the other is consider pedestrian Wooner design elements between units D and E. That was what you brought up, so we can add that. But it'd be soft language like consider or work with, kind of.
Yes, I think that would be really important.
Okay.
I am worried about pedestrian safety, particularly in that area, because if the scenario comes to pass where Alder Lane closes and people are using Bachelor Lane as a drive-through, people might cut through in between those two buildings if there aren't traffic calming measures there. So I'd be worried about pedestrian safety.
Okay.
Yes.
I would agree with you on that, especially considering there's two other projects that are being suggested to be developed, and for people to be able to get out to that light, that Bachelor is going to become a pretty popular little street, I think. So anything we can do to get people and bicycles and pedestrians away from that, I think is best.
Okay. Yes, one more question?
So I'm just wondering about the language of conditioning would it be something like the fourth building occupancy permit on completion of the pool and playground? Is that
right now, the way I have it constructed, it looks like John's gonna jump in.
Okay, great.
Well, wrote it down, it's probably better in your
I
version.
wrote pool and playground built prior to occupancy, so it would be a prior to.
Yeah, I think I would say prior to the fifth building. Does that make sense? Because that's
fine with me.
4 of 6 they're allowed to do, and then they have to produce the pool before the fifth.
I mean, the other option is to condition building E occupancy on completion of those, because that's the building that they're attached to, basically.
I like that.
Yeah, that way, the construction phasing, basically, they're likely to construct those amenities at the same time as the building that's directly adjacent to them.
I guess the only problem with that would be that they could wait to do E until the very end. So, just something to think about.
I think they're leasing offices in building E.
Okay, so I'm looking for guidance from the city attorney. We've had our public comment. We've closed the public hearing. Are we ready now to adopt the motion?
Yeah, I think you're at a point where you could take a motion. Do you have all the conditions you could help read for them?
So, to summarize, the conditions added by the city council would be the pool and playground shall be built prior to occupancy of building E. The pathway, the pedestrian pathway, which is now a planning commission recommendation, will kind of elevate it to a city council condition. But it will be the same unless you want to make an amendment to that planning commission condition. And that the applicant shall consider pedestrian Wooner design elements between between buildings D and E. Now, with respect to the carport, I'm kind of not hearing a firm thing on this. I will say right now, the language is, I use the word should and not shall. It gives them flexibility. We could leave it as that. I would prefer to change it to shall, but I'll leave it to the council to tell me, give me direction on that particular language.
Okay, so I have one more thing, which was just to elevate the language on the traffic calming to a city council
Oh, yeah,
level,
I can do
condition
that.
level.
That's the traffic calming on Bachelor Lane, elevate that
Yes.
to city
And
council.
I feel very strongly that's a real safety issue, so.
Okay.
But can I ask a question about the language? You know, the conditions say added by the planning commission, but if we approve the conditions, it's a condition.
Yeah, it doesn't really
was
make a
added to the
difference.
list by
You're
them,
just,
but
you're
it's
just putting
a
your
condition that
stamp
we're
on it.
approving.
Okay,
Those are all stamped.
Yeah. So
sure, I get it, okay. Just wanted to be clear that that was something that was discussed in the
Okay,
city.
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
put it in bold.
double exclamation point.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like, I'm so sorry, I should know this already, but I'm also not clear on where we stand on moving the carport. So could we take a quick little straw poll? I know you're in favor of moving it. I
would
could,
change it to to a shall.
to a shall. What are your opinions on changing that to a shall?
I agree with Shell. I think it should be more open on that side so there's easier access.
I can live with that.
Okay, yes, I think the council is directing you to change it to a shall for the
Okay.
carports.
I was just asking JP a question. I'm not sure I know the answer to, but I think it's consistent with what the council was saying. The carports need to be eliminated on is that the eastern boundary? But I thought I heard you wanted to allow the flexibility that the applicant could move them to the northern boundary if they chose to. Is that permitted under the approval? Or would they need to authorize it?
No, they could
Okay.
move them under, because we have the final design review process
Okay.
to go through. So they could remove them or they could relocate them.
Thank you.
Yeah. They're not obligated to build the covered parking, I guess is the question.
So we're leaving with flexibility to
Yeah.
relocate them as they desire?
Mhm.
Okay.
Do we don't want the spots eliminated?
No, the spots
Okay,
are gonna
I just
stay.
want-
No,
all right,
we're
be
keeping
clear
all
here.
the
Okay.
parking. We're only talking about the vertical
Okay.
structure.
Okay, I just want to be clear.
Okay, so I think we're clear on what we're moving. Does anyone want to take a stab at that motion? Yeah.
I'd make a motion that we adopt a resolution approving entitlements to allow construction of a mixed-use 177-unit apartment development on a 7.83 property located at the northeast corner of Alder Avenue and State Route 116, and finding that the project consistent with the Cotati General Plan and its environmental impact report and exempt from further environmental review pursuant to CEQA guidelines, section 15183, and with the conditions that JP has nicely recorded for us.
Mayor, I need to make a correction about something I said that is significant. Craig just pointed out that that class 1 pathway will be a private pathway. It will have a maintenance agreement over the top of it, but it will not be part of the public improvement plan and bond. So we may want to add that as a condition, like I said, suggest, that the amenity be built prior to final occupancy or something, or with building E, with that similar condition. Probably final, just
Final
because of
occupancy.
construction.
Okay. Are you amenable to amending your motion?
I will amend my motion to include what you just said.
Okay.
Thank you.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and do a roll call vote for this.
Councilmember Lemus,
Yes.
Councilmember Harvey,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ford,
Yes.
Mayor Sparks.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much. It is 8 o'clock. I'd like to recommend we take a 10-minute break. Reconvene in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to restart the meeting. And we are now at a public hearing, telecommunication ordinance update. So we'll start with a staff presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Sparks, council members. I'll wait for my PowerPoint to come up. But my name is Noah Hausch, Community Development Director for the city. The project before the council this evening is an update to the telecommunications ordinance. And T-Mobile is the applicant on this, and Hannah Boris from T-Mobile is here. However, updating the telecommunication ordinance has been a priority for the city, and it's been on our list for a long time. We have unfortunately had not been able to get to an ordinance to make these updates, but when T-Mobile filed the application, it was a great opportunity to partner with them, and so you'll see some of the changes that staff is recommending, kind of in addition to some of the things that T-Mobile requested to address their needs. So going into the next slide, it's the project description, and as identified, it's introduction and first reading of an ordinance, draft ordinance amending chapters 1722, 1744, and 1790 of the Cotati Municipal Code to allow telecommunication facilities in the open space recreation, so the parks districts, commercial East Cotati corridor, commercial Gravenstein Highway, commercial downtown, Commerce Avenue, and the Northern Gateway zoning districts, all subject to use permit approval. So it is broadening out the areas where these can go, but it still requires the Planning Commission to approve these new facilities in most instances through a use permit. And I'll get into some of the details. We'll go to the next slide. So for some background, our telecommunication ordinance is primarily regulated through Chapter 1744. That was written in 2001. So you can imagine the viewpoint on telecommunication at the time. And it's worth noting, in addition to the allowances being very limited because they were only allowed on city-owned properties and in the industrial areas, they also kind of didn't anticipate where we are today with telecommunication needs, the fact that most people don't have a landline on their phone and that's their primary communication device. In addition to kind of the purpose and the viewpoint that the city's ordinance took at that time, significant changes in state and federal law have been made that have, similar to the housing discussion we just had, kind of eroded the city's ability to regulate these facilities because they've become so ubiquitous for all of us. And so the goal tonight is to both respond to the request that was made by the applicant, but then also to meet some of the city's need in just dragging this ordinance and these rules into the 21st century. And some of the things that have been allowed through state and federal law are we have to allow co-location, so we have to allow another wireless carrier to co-locate on an existing wireless carrier facility. We have to respond to different types of applications in mandated timelines. So similar to the shot clock we have for development review, we now have these timelines on telecommunication review. And we're subject to all of these things already. However, our ordinance just doesn't acknowledge or kind of recognize that because of when it was written. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is a zoning map of the city, and I'm going to have Kevin do some advancing of the slide. So if you just advance it once, it highlights the industrial area, and then the blue, so that pink triangle that's in the northwest corner, telecommunication facilities can go. And then if you advance it one more time, Kevin, now we're adding the commercial Gravenstein Corridor District one more time, the northern portion of the downtown, excluding the downtown core, another advance, Kevin, and then those red areas along East Cotati Avenue, which are, it's CE is the zoning district. That's the proposal. And then Kevin, one additional time. Sorry, there's a couple more pockets of Cotati, East Cotati, commercial East Cotati, and then one more advance, and then all of the city parks. And so the reason staff chose to include the city parks, that was a staff proposed element of the changes, is because the original purpose of the ordinance, in addition to saying they can go in the industrial portion, also identified them as being located on city-owned property, essentially as a mechanism for revenue. So we have a cellular tower on the city's courtyard, for example. The city gets rent from the facilities that are located on there. And so staff chose to also include the city-owned park locations in this recommended change because it would meet the intent of allowing cellular to telecommunication facilities on city-owned property, but also because parks are often close to residential properties where there is a high need for telecommunication connections, but you don't want to put those facilities directly in your residential neighborhoods. So it's an opportunity to both meet the needs of cell connection in residential neighborhoods, but not have them located in those neighborhoods. Additionally, it's important to recognize the city would always have control over even entertaining someone's interest in putting a facility there because they're owned by the city, those parcels. So before an application could even get made for a use permit, the city would previously have to agree to the even idea of those locations being used for a telecommunication facility. So just wanted to explain kind of how we got there. T-Mobile's original application was just to allow them in the commercial East Cotati corridor and Gravenstein Highway. So it's just worth noting those changes are added by staff. We'll go to the next slide. So as identified and we've discussed, T-Mobile is proposing certain changes, and those are identified in blue text in the red line strike-through documents that the council has for review, and the red text is changes proposed by the city staff, community development department staff. Generally, it's to allow the telecom facilities in almost all of our commercial districts, excluding the downtown core, updating the procedural requirements based on numerous changes in the law, and then updating certain definitions. Breakpoint technology is basically a term where if you had a cell tower and it was to fail, it's literally engineered to fail at a point where the tower falls directly down and doesn't fall like a tree to where, you know, it could fall with the full distance of the height of the tower. Stealth design is also added. Any new facility would be required to be a stealth design. Staff finds that that's very important in the context of a city, but stealth design does not always mean fake trees. It's important to note, you'll see sometimes church steeples are cell towers. Sometimes building panels are actually have antennas behind them, and they're transparent for the radio frequencies to allow it to work. It looks like a part of the building, but there's actually cell towers behind that. And T-Mobile's presentation shows some of those things. We'll get to the next slide. As identified in the staff reports, community development staff found that the project implements many goals of the general plan, policies and objectives, which would support these changes to the ordinance. And staff finds that they are consistent with the general plan EIR analysis under 15183, which is the same environmental determination that was used for the previous project. Any individual project, so someone coming in to actually construct a cell tower, would have to get their own CEQA review and would be subject to all mitigation requirements of the CEQA document. And so with that, it's recommended, we'll go to the next slide, and it's being recommended by both, no problem, yeah. Well, I believe the next slide, actually, you know what, it summarizes the Planning Commission discussion, which the Planning Commission reviewed the proposal. They were unanimously supportive of the ordinance. They voted 4-0. There was one person out of not available. That was on January 16th. And one of the main things that was discussed was just the level of telecommunication connectivity in the city currently. So the goal with this is to improve the connectivity in town. Staff's happy to answer any questions. If the council's not comfortable with certain elements, they can be stripped out by the council. The parks allowance was something that staff wasn't sure if there would be full support of, but I will say it's something that is not uncommon to see. I personally worked on a project in another city where one of the golf course netting towers or poles is a cell tower. It's a stealth design, it's on a city park. Generally, it is a good way to provide additional connectivity. There's lots of options for stealthing those designs. But if the council's not comfortable with that, you could direct that those allowances be removed or other changes if the council should see fit. And with that, we will go to the recommendation, which is from the Community Development Department and the Planning Commission, that the council approve the ordinance amending chapters 1722, 1744, and 1790 to allow telecommunication facilities in the zoning districts discussed with use permit approval from the Planning Commission. And with that, I'm available for questions, and Ms. Hannah Boris is here from T-Mobile to add another presentation.
All right, any questions for Noah? Yeah.
So Noah, this says it's specific to T-Mobile. Since it sounds like they're just the first one out of the gate, are we going to get like 6 of these, each with wanting their own special little changes to our ordinance?
So T-Mobile is the applicant, but it applies citywide. It changes the actual rules for the city for all cell towers and cell communication facilities.
Correct, but it was written specifically for things that they wanted. I guess my concern is then is AT&T next month going to want these 3 things, and then, you know, Verizon's going to come in the month after that and want these 3 things. Just,
I mean, that can happen, but it's, from the staff perspective, the main motivation for, and I'll let T-Mobile speak for themselves, but they want to build a new cell tower on a building in town. Our rules don't allow it. They have coverage problems. They'll show a map that shows the coverage gap they're trying to fill by building a new facility. And so they said, hey, city, your rules are antiquated, frankly. We'd like to update them. And yes, to meet our need to put a tower in this location on East Cotati Avenue, we're going to file a zoning code text amendment. And then I said, great, I've been trying to get to this for a long time. I'm going to make sure we're consistent with all of the other elements of the state and federal law that have changed. And I'm going to make some suggestions based on the purpose of the ordinance as it's stated to do some of the other things that I've discussed.
okay, and so you talk about the antennas themselves and all of that, and it mentions the associated equipment. I know there's been a lot of changes in that. Are we going to be talking about having more of those ugly refrigerator-sized apparatuses sitting now all over the place, up and down all of these areas and in our parks?
So that's a great question. So none of this applies to the public right of way. So this does not apply to any of those facilities that you see bolted to the side of telephone poles, the giant utility boxes that you're seeing in the right of way. This is only on private property. So that's a good distinction to make. It's very common for, or I guess it's anything that's a street or a sidewalk, generally zoning code rules don't apply to. They live in their own world that Craig's department manages, and they have their own processes. So that's a good distinction to make. And the associated equipment would only go with new facilities that are on private property that we review. In some instances, that does include an emergency generator. Not always, but it is a not uncommon thing. And then often a few utility cabinets similar to transformers that you see. In my experience, they try to put them all within the footprint of a tower. This is if they're building a new tower, and they wrap that in similar stealth type design, whether it's a wooden fence to make it blend in with residential neighborhood close by, or even within the body of whatever the stealth tower design is.
When they can.
Correct. I mean, there's always instances, yeah.
Okay, because that was, you know, some of the wording that you put in here, it seemed very vague and loose.
Yeah. It's intentional to allow flexibility because, again, and this is my personal opinion, fake trees they're not always that stealthy, right?
Yes.
And so I try to light these regulations that they have to be stealth design, but I don't want to be prescribing exactly what they do or how they achieve that, because the technology changes so quickly, and often they have things that I'm not even aware of that will be a better fit for the context they're proposed in.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lemus?
Yes. Are these T-Mobile, are they going to be co-located with other existing carriers? Like if AT&T already has something, are they going to add to that, or are they going to build different ones?
So it's my understanding this is a new facility, and this action tonight would not approve any new facilities. It would facilitate a future application for them to
Okay.
submit to build it. And I'll let Ms. Boris get into it.
Okay, so there's no predetermined sites. That will be determined by the application for different locations.
Correct. I do think they have a site in mind, but this applies to all those zoning districts that we've talked about.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Right. I had a question, which is just relating to the use permits. So just to be clear, every new facility under this ordinance would be subject to a use permit?
So that's a good question. No.
No,
So
okay.
under federal law, certain types of facilities we have to allow. So certain building mounted facilities that essentially aren't visible, co-location, as I talked about, they have a, similar to the housing changes, there was changes made years ago that allow those to go through to make sure that there is cell connectivity in communities. Standalone new towers, absolutely. And there's a little bit of gray area between those two types, and it would be a case-by-case basis that we'd have to look at that.
Okay, and you said in response to Councilmember Harvey's question that this only applies to things located on private property, but did you mean also like public parks and things too?
I'm sorry, yes. Individual parcels. So they may be city-owned, but it's not part of the right-of-way.
Part of the right-of-way.
And I'm sorry, that's a good distinction to make. So there are publicly owned parcels that aren't part of the right-of-way. Like City Hall sits on an individual property. And I'm sorry, that's a good distinction.
That's okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing something. And then last question is just if we were to, on a future project, have a discretionary decision about a use permit, are there any state laws that would sort of prescribe our ability to use any discretion in those decisions? Would we be required to provide use permits under certain conditions, or would we have more broad discretion?
That's a good question. There are certain instances, and I think Ms. Boris's presentation speaks to it, where essentially if they don't have any other option as a means of providing service, I think the law does lean in their favor. But I don't have all of the details on that.
That is correct, more or less. But the Telecommunications Act of 1996 is a federal law. If they have coverage issues and they can prove it up, the city's going to be in a position where it has to approve the site.
And that applies now.
Yeah, I was just
Correct.
a follow-up question. So us allowing more sites to be options doesn't really change that or open us up to...
It doesn't, but it's very, very helpful, because if you have a very limited amount of sites within the city, it makes it easier for them to make their case. Whereas if you have a bunch of different places where they could go, then you could say, well, what about over there? Yeah.
Thank you. That helps me. I just wanted to clarify the sort of legal ramifications. Any other questions? All right, let's open the public hearing, and I'd like to invite you to come up and give us a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Sparks and council members. My name is Hannah Boris. I'm with Wireless Policy Group, speaking on behalf of T-Mobile. I'd like to thank Director Hausch and his staff for their support and assistance with this application process. I'll try and keep this brief. I know there might be a little bit of overlap between our applications. I understand it's it's late, and I want to be respectful of your time, so I'll try not to duplicate anything. Next slide, please. So first, just want to start with the primary purpose of the reason that T-Mobile proposed these text amendments. The first is to provide service enhancements for Cotati residents. So the proposed amendments aim to improve wireless communication services for Cotati's residents, businesses, visitors, and first responders. And under the current regulations, limit wireless facility locations to industrial or public facility districts only, which is approximately only 3% of the city's total parcels. And this restriction significantly restricts T-Mobile's ability to effectively provide service to the majority of the Cotati community. Since the adoption of the city's Chapter 17.44 Telecommunications Facility Ordinance, which was over 20 years ago, there have been significant changes to federal law, and so we propose some amendments just to ensure alignment with current federal regulations. Additionally, wireless network design and technology have undergone considerable evolution over the past 20 years, prompting the need for amendments to bring existing development standards and definitions up to date with the reality of modern networks. Next slide. So these are just some wireless statistics which highlight the importance of T-Mobile's network improvements for the Cotati community. Demand for wireless data is expected to grow 20% per year through 2028. 97% of Americans have a cell phone, with 85% of those owning a smartphone. 72% of California households rely on wireless as their only means of telephone communication, with over 81% of children living in wireless-only households and over 85% of renters living in wireless-only households. 240 million calls are made to 911 each year, and in many areas, 80% or more are from wireless devices. So these statistics just show that year over year, more and more people are cutting the cord, becoming entirely dependent on wireless devices. This creates additional demands on the wireless network that make it challenging for us as an industry to keep up with. And for all intents and purposes, wireless providers like T-Mobile really are the modern day telephone company. Next slide, please. So I won't go over this because I know Director Hausch covered this, but this is just a snapshot of the current zoning map highlighting wireless facilities are currently only permitted in public facility and industrial districts only. Next slide. And this is an analysis of GIS data. So essentially everything highlighted in blue is where wireless facilities can go under the city's existing regulations, and everything in that neutral beige color is currently restricted. So you can see only 3% of the city is open to locating wireless facilities, and this effectively hinders T-Mobile's ability to provide service to large swaths of the city. Next slide. So this is a service map of T-Mobile's existing service coverage in the city. So anything highlighted in yellow or green is considered to have reliable in-building coverage. So customers can reliably, have voice and data services within their home. Anything in blue or orange is considered to have marginal coverage. So they may be able to make a phone call or have access in their vehicle or outside, but have limited to no service inside of their homes or commercial businesses. T-Mobile has an immediate service need in the business district along East Cotati Avenue. So that's where T-Mobile is looking to improve service in the immediate future in that surrounding neighborhood. But under existing regulations, it would not be possible to locate a facility due to the zoning restrictions. Next slide. And so this is just GIS analysis of what the changes would look like with the permitted locations under the proposed amendments. And this would open up approximately 12% of the city's total parcels. Next slide. This is just an executive summary of the proposed amendments. Director Hausch went through these in much more detail than I have listed here, so I won't go through these. But again, I'm happy to answer any questions about the amendments proposed by T-Mobile. Next slide. So these are some examples of some modern stealth techniques. These are commonly used for rooftops. So on the top left, this would be an example of FRP extension to existing building signage. So all of the antennas, our equipment, are located behind that screen extension. The top right is antennas screened with reflective tape. So this is designed for the antennas to blend with the surrounding sky. This typically works better on taller buildings. The bottom left is antennas screened within an FRP enclosure, which is designed to resemble rooftop mechanical equipment penthouse. And then the bottom right would be faux rooftop vents. Next slide. And then these are just some example of freestanding stealth facility designs. Director Hausch made it clear that the city of Cotati is not a fan of trees, and so we just wanted to highlight that there's a number of other stealth technique options, such as grain silos, water tanks, marquee signage, clock towers, which can also be used to entirely screen facilities from public view. Next slide. That concludes my presentation. We respectfully request your approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, any questions for the applicant? Okay, I think we don't seem to have any questions at the moment. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
I'm going to open it up to public comment. Yes, come on up.
Yes, good evening, Council. Neil Hancock. I have in the past worked in the telecom industry many years ago, but not on the wireless side. One of the questions I'd actually ask on this, for any of the telecom towers on city property or the parks and things, could Wi-Fi also be added should the city so choose? It would seem like it should be, but I'm just raising that question up. And is the smart train, looking at that map, there is areas that are not covered in that area, but is the smart train part of the city property, or is that something that also could be, it's a public facility generally, but another possible location? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I actually ask staff to respond to that? Is the train station, and I couldn't see on the map, included in that?
The train station is a city-owned facility.
So it would be included in the possible locations?
So you know what, that neighborhood has its own specific zoning.
Specific plan, yeah.
Yes, but if the council thinks that it's a good idea, we are currently updating that specific plan and we can include that as an allowed land use.
Okay, I think that's probably a good idea. Yes. Okay.
That was going to be my question, because that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Okay, sorry, we're getting off track. Is there any other public comment in the building? Do we have any Zoom attendees? Yes.
Yes, I'll just check in with the Zoom attendees. Speaking to the Zoom attendees, please use the raise hand icon to make a public comment on this item. Mayor Sparks, that'll end public comment.
All right, thank you. I will close the public hearing now, and we will open it up to council discussion. Yes, Councilor Berlinas.
Yeah, just, there was a comment about Wi-Fi. So it's just for telecoms availability, not really Wi-Fi? Just questions.
Yeah, this is specifically to telecom. However, if a new facility was built, like in a park, for instance, it would have all the infrastructure needed to add Wi-Fi to that, as far as electricity and connection to the local network, et cetera.
The Wi-Fi decision would be like our city's kind of request to the telecom company versus them just providing it?
Yeah, it would be kind of an apples and oranges part of the conversation, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the idea of adding, I'm not sure how the parcels, what's happening with the specific plan at Santero Way, but whatever portion of that is identified for commercial, I think ought to also be included in this.
Or perhaps commercial and city-owned parcels. Yeah. Any comments? Yeah.
So Noah, there was a lot of changes that were made in here, and a couple of them staff made, but the majority of them were made by T-Mobile. Have you looked at those in relationship to other cities' ordinances, or did we just accept what they asked for? Because some of them seem a little bit, favorable to the telecom companies rather than, substantial change, and then it kind of locks us out of standards like height limitations and all things like that, and where they can say where feasible, and that's a very, very broad statement. It'd be extremely easy for someone to say, and the examples they use, technical, logistical, leasing, or economic challenges. I mean, that's pretty broad, and it could be, construed as, well, I can come up with any one of those.
Absolutely. So I will say I reviewed these in the context of other jurisdictions, but also the state and federal laws that have directed these changes. And a lot of that language that's very favorable to the telecom industry comes straight out of that state and federal law. So it's not necessarily being requested by T-Mobile. It's more the state and the federal government telling local jurisdictions what we have to do. Some of those terms, substantial change, for example, are defined in that legislation, and so we can look back to that to quantify, does it fit or not? So it's not just based on someone calling it that. But a majority of the changes are essentially just bringing our ordinance into current expectations.
That's good to hear.
So I'm very pleased to see this coming forward. I hear from constituents pretty frequently about how poor the cell reception is with data throughout the city, and it's a big safety concern that people have. So I think this is a great step, and I'm really hoping that it'll lead to improved cell reception. So I'm very supportive of this, and I appreciate all the work that you've done on the ordinance. Any further questions or comments from the council?
Just one. On packet page 398, it's B2, B2, the height limitations exceptions. It says basically, it gives height limitations, but says if additional height is required to meet a technical service objective, then they can go higher. And it doesn't, the A, B, and C under there doesn't require that they also provide some kind of analysis of alternative sites where they might be able to meet their technical service objective while still meeting the height objective. So they could just pick a site and then say, we need more height here, and then they would be off the hook for having to consider other sites where they could meet the height objective. And I wonder if there's a way to say, you need to first try to find a site where you can meet the height objective, meet the height restriction. I don't know if that language is directly out of law, do you know? Or
so the proposed height exception is nothing to do with federal law. We would be open to considering adding an additional condition as you recommended. Just wanted to point out this can also work in another way. So sometimes, let's say we're proposing to go on a rooftop facility, which is typically more preferred by a city because it's an existing facility. It could typically be integrated better. It's not new ground disturbance. It's not a new tower. But let's say we couldn't meet that height limit, and maybe we just needed to go 1 foot higher. Well, oftentimes a city might prefer that we go 1 foot higher on an existing rooftop rather than proposing a brand new freestanding facility that could meet the height limitations. So that's why we propose, we ask for a little bit of flexibility there. These standards are also discretionary. The city does not have to approve them, and we would have to demonstrate that we could meet this criteria. And again, it's a discretionary decision by the city, but allowing flexibility does sometimes can be to the city's benefit in situations like the one I just described.
I see. Thanks. Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I wonder if that last sentence of the introductory paragraph could, rather than saying if the proposed facility exceeds, could just say if the proposer requests maximum height exceeding the maximum height for the underlying zone, making it clear in the language that it's a request, not a right. And
I understand what you're saying. Just by its nature, in that it's a use permit, the use itself is discretionary.
Okay.
So the underlying assumptions coming forward already are that it's not a right. So this section of the code governs those discretionary actions subject to use permit for these facilities. And it's worth noting in the land use table up above, it has an S identified. So it even is kind of a heightened kind of identifier of these are very special rules for these very specific land uses that the city has discretion in.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm comfortable then leaving it alone. I'm envisioning following on the heels of the housing discussion, the state saying any zone where facilities are allowed, now they're just by right and you don't even get to have any discretion. So presumably not going to happen with these, but.
Thank you. And the state of our coverage is so dire in certain neighborhoods that I think I'm in favor of offering a lot of flexibility to get them facilities placed in the best location that's going to fill out those coverage maps the best. So, yes.
Yes is long as they are at least somewhat aesthetically pleasing. When I was reading in here about, cohabitation, I had this thought of everybody, well, I need to go up 5 more feet. Well, I need to go up 5 more feet. And all of a sudden you've got like this skyline of antennas. So it was good to hear that you also have mechanisms for making those not be up there. So while I agree with you, I also don't want a skyline of antennas.
Yes, I agree. I think I feel comfortable with this, given that it is a discretionary use permit process. So we'll get to take a look at any proposals. Yeah. All right.
Any further questions?
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Right, I think we're at the point where we're ready to make a motion. If anyone wants to move this.
Shall I make a motion? So this is just to introduce, right, the first. Okay, so I make a motion that we conduct this first reading. Is that what we're doing? Conduct this first reading of an ordinance to amend Chapter 17.22, 17.44, and 17.90 of the Cotati Municipal Code to allow telecommunication facilities to the OSR, CE, CG, CD, NG, and C8 zoning districts, subject to use permit approval.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, that will move us on. We have no regular agenda items tonight, so we'll move straight on to our city manager report.
All right, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So in the world of public works, we're going to be doing some water main cleaning in March. And this is to remove just the fine sand that can settle out in the distribution mains over time. It's scheduled to begin on March 18th, and it's supposed to last for 10 working days through March 29th. Residents in L section, areas south of Myrtle Drive and Hunter's Ridge, which is like Clothier, that area, Lasker, that. So we love to use subdivision names that nobody knows, but that's the area we're talking about. They're going to receive notices because some of the mains there will be flushed, and there could be some temporary discoloration of the water while they do that. This newer process that we've been using for several years now pumps water in closed loops and uses filters to remove the fine sand. So we don't. The traditional way to do it is just to basically open up a fire hydrant and blow the water into the street and down the storm drain. But many places still do that. We haven't done that in quite a while. But so anyway, that's going on in the near future. For our annual bike and ped safety project, we've been just tracking requests that have come in through the year, plus other longer standing requests from the LRSP. But we're looking at for this year's annual budget that the council allocates, doing some enhancements to the crosswalk at West Sierra at La Plaza. So it's that one crosswalk, it's an uncontrolled crosswalk there, where we have a lot of events and people crossing there. So we've gotten a fair number of comments about that crosswalk. And also adding additional lighting on the stop sign at East Cotati Avenue at LaSalle. And then we've also been working with some residents on Benson Lane about some potential speed bumps, as Benson Lane's a common cut through for people moving from Old Redwood Highway to East Cotati or the Oliver Shopping Center area. This past Saturday, the city held its second community meeting that's regarding the Sunflower Park improvements. So that was held here at City Hall on Saturday. It was very good. A lot of happy people that another park is on its way to getting improved. And the workshop focused on alternatives for the playground area, as well as it's what's being called a meditation area, but sort of a garden area behind the tennis courts back there, and various other improvements such as like lighting and landscaping and those sort of things. We also have a poll up on the city website and on the city homepage on the news carousel. There's a link there for that survey if anyone wants to take the survey for that park, and it's going to be up for most of March before the pole's taken down. So go there if you're interested in that. The Santero Way specific plan is still moving along. A second Community Advisory Committee meeting is scheduled for this week. And also the draft existing conditions report for the CEQA analysis for the project is scheduled to be posted on the website this week also. So that's, those elements are just right on us this week. Next steps are the creation of the land use and circulation alternatives scheduled for April 10th and presentation of these for public review and comment. The public input will allow the draft CEQA EIR analysis to be completed and selection of a preferred alternative. And then the preferred alternative becomes a land use option that informs the draft specific plan update. And public availability of this draft plan is anticipated by early summer. So that's pretty close. And I think that's it for that right now. Also, the ATP, the Active Transportation Plan, we're also continuing to work on, and it has been posted for a 30-day public review and comment period 25th, and there's a variety of additional public meetings related to this plan, including February 29th from 5 to 7 at the Cotati Smart Station. There's going to be workshops to discuss the draft plan that's hosted by the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition and SCTA. Also March 12th at 6 p.m., Cotati City Hall. This is a city council meeting to review, discuss, and provide comments on the draft ATP. So next agenda, you'll see that. March 18th at 6 p.m., the Planning Commission will also meet to review and discuss and provide comments on the draft ATP. And then finally, April 15th, the Planning Commission is scheduled to formally consider it, the plan. And then May 14th is the schedule for the council to formally consider and adopt the ATP. And with that, I'll just leave it there, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Right, no questions. Thank you for the report. Do we have any city council member reports? Yes.
Yeah, I just went to a meeting February 16th, the Mayors and Council Members Legislative Committee meeting, and we had an update from Sonoma Clean Power. Jeff Cyphers was there, and he did make a request to different jurisdictions to support a legislative platform around the geozone, supporting encouraging geothermal and other baseload renewable power, and he provided some language. In addition to that, some of the local legislators representatives came and they did talk about how the bill cycle is closing and that at the next meeting there will be kind of new bills that will be coming up for discussion and people will be adding information. The next meeting is March 15th. So that's the meeting.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Harvey.
On the 14th of February, I attended the Sonoma Marin Mosquito Vector Control meeting, and we actually approved the contract for a brand new district manager, Peter Bonkerud, and he will be starting in April. Phil is retiring, so he joined us for a little bit and introduced himself. Then we had a great presentation from Casey Richter, who is their education person, and I gave the information to Damien, but two things. One, I think it might be good for the ranch, one of the programs, but I also think with the 2x2x2, her program that she does is like TK through like 8th grade, and it's age appropriate, and she does some pretty awesome things. So I thought maybe she could come and talk to your group and, you know, kind of get hooked in there. Because right now, I guess they do signups, but it's kind of on a website, and it's only if teachers hear about it. So it felt like that was a good place for her to get hooked in. So then I wanted to let you guys know that on May 4th is the Marin Sonoma Mosquito Vector Control Open House. Saturday, May 4th from 11 to 3, and it's open to the public, and they'll have all kinds of things like live mosquito and tick exhibits, backyard bug contests for kids, I don't quite get this one, a bug tasting booth and games and things. So it'll be right out there on Hellman Lane, but it sounds like fun. So that's something for all of you to consider. Then the next day I attended the Zero Waste Sonoma meeting, and we did talk about the compost thing because I was curious about that. So right now they have pretty tied down Cotati and Santa Rosa. Santa Rosa's is going to be at the Children's Museum, is where they're looking at. And then they are very, very, very close in Sonoma Valley, Sebastopol, and Healdsburg. And now what they're concerned about is that they may run out, but I guess with the way the grant is that they have, that they'll be able to purchase, if we need more compost, they'll be able to provide as much as we need for folks. So that was good to hear. And then lastly, I attended the North Bay Division meeting, and we had a presentation by the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. It seemed to be similar to the same presentation that we got a year ago. I didn't note that anything really had changed. So we'll see. Sonoma, the county of Sonoma, I guess Damien said they're starting to work with them, but we'll have to see how that may shake out for us if it passes. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Anything to report?
Yeah, so I also went to the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority presentation with Councilmember Harvey, and I agree with her assessment. It was very similar to the presentation last year, which was maybe at the Mayors and Council Members Association rather than the North. So both organizations had the same presentation. But earlier this week, whenever it was a Russian River Watershed Association board meeting at which we approved the work plan for next fiscal year. So that is one small item in the budget we'll eventually approve in a month or so. Yeah, but they do a lot of great work. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Rivers and I attended the 2x2x2 Education Committee, although actually we didn't, because we found out that at this meeting that when the committee began to meet again, it was, unbeknownst to the Rohnert Park Council, it was reformatted as the Rohnert Park Education Committee. And so in their mind, legally, it turns out all of the rest of the people who aren't on the Rohnert Park City Council have been attending as guests to their Rohnert Park Education Committee. So there was an interesting discussion that this all came up because we had talked about the idea of rotating the meeting locations, and then I'm not sure how it all came to light, but through their talking with their staff, they realized, well, we can't rotate the meetings because we've actually reformed this group as the Rohnert Park Education Committee. So so there was some discussion about potentially requesting that this committee used to exist under the auspices of the Cotati-Rohnert Park Unified School District, and there was some discussion of requesting to the school district that they take ownership of the 2x2 and restart the 2x2x2. So we'll see where this goes. But I just wanted to give you an update on that. We are continuing to attend as guests for the moment, and we'll see where it goes from here. Yeah. That's all I had to report.
Hey, Mayor, sorry to interrupt you,
Yes.
but there was one more thing I wanted to add. I
Sure.
just wanted to add a nice long pause before I told you this last bit of news, which was city staff were informed last Thursday that the city of Cotati received the CSFMO, which is a budget award for fiscal 23-24, and we're the only city in Sonoma County to receive this award. So anyway, just a lot of thanks to our admin services
kudos.
staff.
Good job. All
Thanks.
right. Thank you. All right. At this point, we'll open up for public comment on non-action agenda items. Does anyone wish to make a comment?
Just two quick things. Marty Kashuba. Just for my education, I know you passed the resolution. What does stealth mean?
If you want to make the rest of your comment, then we'll have staff
Okay, tell me
address
what
your
stealth
question
means.
after. Yeah.
But I'd like About 4 weeks ago, I received a letter from AT&T saying, you will no longer provided with a land phone. In March, we're not doing land phones, and they gave a map. The map included all of Cotati and other areas. The Press Democrat the next day, top headline, loss of land phones. Now, Kevin has relieved my anxiety because he said he's received a email from AT&T, whom I don't trust. I know T-Mobile's not here. I'm not sure I trust them either, but the AT&T said, no, nobody's going to lose their land phone. But I'm concerned that there's been no public statement of that. Kevin is kind enough to sending me the email he's received. So I would just like the council to be alerted. It would be wrong to, and I'm sure the FCC, I hope, wouldn't allow them to do it, but I feel you're having a position, yes, we need our land phones in the office, and many of us, I have a land phone as well as a cell phone. So thanks just for thinking about that. And then if someone can tell me what stealth means, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you for the comment. Could you address the definition of stealth?
Yeah, stealth is just a design that is intended to blend in with the background that it's around. There's a definition in the code, but it's basically so it doesn't look like a cell tower.
All right. Is there any Zoom comment?
Thank you, Mayor Sparks. Speaking to our Zoom attendees, please use the raise hand icon to make a public comment. Mayor Sparks, that'll end public comment.
Okay, great. We're going to go to closed session in a moment. The topic of the closed session will be conference with city labor negotiators, Government Code Section 54957.6, city designated representative, city manager or designee, employee organization, Cotati Police Officers Association, and Cotati Police Management Association. I'd like to go ahead and open public comment for the closed session, if anyone has a comment they'd like to make about this. Okay, seeing no one in the room, let's open it up to Zoom one more time.
Once again, speaking to our Zoom attendees, please use the raise hand icon to make a public comment. Mayor Sparks, that'll end public comment.
Okay, thank you. We are going to go into closed session at this time. Okay, we are back from closed session. We have nothing to report out of closed session. Was there any information received after the agenda was posted?
Mayor Sparks, there was not.
All right, thank you. With that, the meeting is adjourned.